Have you ever met someone who wasn't the loudest person in the room, wasn't desperately trying to impress anyone, and wasn't even speaking very much, yet somehow everyone noticed them? Days later, you couldn't remember exactly what they were wearing. You couldn't even remember everything they said, but you remembered how they made the room feel. Most people call that charisma. Others call it confidence. Ancient mythology gave it another name, the Siren. And almost everything you've been told about this archetype is wrong. It isn't really about beauty. It isn't about seduction. It isn't about making people want you. It's about something much more powerful. Attention. Because the Siren never chased attention. She became impossible to ignore. Carl Jung never wrote specifically about the Siren, but he spent his life studying why certain psychological patterns appear over and over again throughout human history. And if we look at the Siren through that lens, she stops being a mythical creature and becomes a mirror. One that asks a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What makes a human being truly magnetic? By the end of this video, you'll have a way to actually test where you stand. Let's find out. When most people hear the word siren, they imagine a beautiful woman sitting on a rock singing sailors to their death. That's the version Hollywood loves. But mythology is rarely that simple. The ancient Greeks weren't trying to warn us about beautiful women. They were trying to warn us about desire. The sirens represented something every human being experiences, the irresistible pull toward what promises to complete us. Something we believe will finally make us happy, finally make us enough, finally make us feel alive. The sailors didn't drown because the sirens forced them. They drowned because they abandoned themselves. They stopped steering their own ship and followed a voice that felt stronger than their own. That's what made the myth survive for thousands of years. Because it was never really about the sea, it's about the mind. Carl Jung believed that what attracts us most isn't always what we consciously want. Sometimes it's what we've forgotten about ourselves. Every archetype carries a psychological pull. The hero calls us toward courage. The sage calls us toward wisdom. The lover calls us toward connection. The siren calls us toward aliveness. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression on you. It's rarely because they're the most physically attractive. It's because they seem completely present, completely engaged, completely awake. There's an intensity about them that has nothing to do with volume. They're not trying to capture attention. They're fully occupying their own existence, and people notice. Jung observed that the psyche naturally projects qualities it longs to develop. That's why we sometimes become fascinated by someone we've barely met, convinced we're seeing something extraordinary in them, when really they're reflecting something our own unconscious is asking us to reclaim. The siren often becomes that projection, not because she's perfect, because she represents a life lived with intensity, curiosity, and emotional honesty. The real question isn't, why am I attracted to this person? The better question is, what part of myself comes alive in their presence? That question changes everything, because now the archetype stops being someone you chase and becomes something you cultivate. Here's something most people never notice. Magnetic people don't spend their lives asking, how do I make people like me? They're asking a completely different question. How do I become fully present in this moment? There's an enormous difference. When you're trying to be liked, part of your attention immediately leaves the conversation. You're monitoring yourself, wondering how you sound, whether you're saying the right thing, whether they're impressed. You're no longer with the other person. You're watching yourself through their eyes. The siren doesn't do that. She listens. She notices. She becomes curious. And curiosity has a strange effect. It makes people feel seen. Most human beings spend their lives wanting to be understood. Very few feel that they truly are. That's why someone who listens with genuine attention often feels more magnetic than someone who speaks brilliantly. Presence is remembered longer than performance. Think back to someone who changed your life. Maybe they didn't give the greatest advice. Maybe they didn't say very much at all, but when they were with you, you felt like nothing else in the world existed. That is psychological presence. And it's one of the rarest forms of attraction, not because it's mysterious, but because it's becoming increasingly uncommon. Today we're surrounded by notifications, screens, distractions, half-finished conversations, people waiting for their turn to speak instead of listening. In a distracted world, attention has become one of the most valuable gifts you can offer another human being. And that's exactly why the Siren continues to fascinate us. Not because she demands attention, because she understands its value. But every archetype has a shadow, and the Siren's shadow is particularly deceptive because it doesn't look dangerous at first. It looks successful. Here's how it happens, one shift at a time. Presence that once drew people in slowly becomes a dependence on being noticed. Confidence that once felt grounded becomes a constant need for validation. Magnetism that once attracted naturally becomes something closer to manipulation. Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious eventually begins controlling us. And nowhere is that easier to see than here. The healthy Siren enjoys connection. The shadow Siren needs it. One inspires desire. The other feeds on it. One attracts naturally. The other constantly checks whether she's still attractive enough. From the outside, the difference is almost invisible. Internally, they're living completely different lives. Here's one way to recognize which one is running the show. Ask yourself, if nobody noticed me for a week, who would I be? Would you still feel valuable? Still pursue your goals? Still feel alive? Or would something inside begin searching quietly and desperately for attention? That's where the shadow reveals itself. Attention is a beautiful thing, until it becomes the only place your identity knows how to breathe. This is why so many people become exhausted, not from maintaining relationships, but from maintaining an image, performing a version of themselves they hope will keep being desired, until eventually they forget who they were before the performance began. That's the tragedy of the Siren's shadow. She spends so much energy attracting everyone that she slowly loses contact with herself. The more she chases attention, the less authentic she becomes. And authenticity was the very thing people were attracted to in the first place. So what does this archetype actually ask of us? Not to become irresistible, not to become mysterious, not to make people want us. It asks something much more difficult. Become fully present with your own life. Because people who are deeply connected to themselves naturally become more connected to others. Presence can't be faked. Curiosity can't be performed forever. Peace can't be manufactured. The Siren reminds us that magnetism isn't something you create. It's something that's left over once you stop performing. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Perhaps that's why the Siren still captivates us after thousands of years. Not because she sang beautifully, not because she was impossibly attractive, but because she represents something every human being longs for, to feel completely alive, without pretending, without chasing, without asking for permission. Maybe the real question was never, how do I become magnetic? Maybe it's this. What part of me have I abandoned that no longer allows people to feel the real me? Because the people we remember most aren't always the loudest, or the most beautiful, or the most successful. They're the ones who made us feel that they were completely there. And perhaps that's what true magnetism has always been. Here's your way to actually test where you stand with this archetype. Not in theory, in your next real conversation. The next time you're talking with someone, notice how much of your attention is actually with them, versus rehearsing what you'll say next, or wondering how you're coming across. Just notice it. Don't judge it. Then try this once today. In one conversation, give someone your full, undistracted attention. No phone, no half listening, no waiting for your turn, just presence. Pay attention to what changes. Not in them, in you. That's the whole practice. Not becoming more magnetic, becoming more here. Before you go, I'd love to ask you one question. Have you ever met someone whose presence stayed with you long after the conversation ended? What do you think made them unforgettable? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else might recognise a piece of themselves in your answer. And if you're fascinated by the psychology of archetypes, Carl Jung, and the hidden patterns that shape human behaviour, subscribe to Archetypes in Action. We're only beginning to explore them.